quality relationships and connectedness. In module number 2, we talked about the context of youth work and what makes it different from other professions. One of the key things that makes youth work unique is that in youth work, the relationship is the most important thing. The entire purpose of youth work is to form relationships with young people. Then out of that is where the magic happens. Like mentoring, journeying alongside them, discipling and guiding them in their walk with God, but forming the relationship with them first is key. More often than not, most youth leaders I run into are really good at forming relationships with young people. It's something they do naturally, and that's probably why they were drawn to youth work in the first place. Sometimes when I invite youth workers to tell me about how they form relationships with young people, they struggle to put words to it because it's so simple and second nature. Things like listening, asking questions, being trustworthy, following through, keeping their word, being genuinely interested, piecing together a picture of their world, visiting them in their space rather than making them come to you, encouraging them, meeting them over food or drink. It seems simple, and it is. And if you want to level up, some youth workers even use techniques like reflective listening, motivational interviewing, or empowering questions. However, while relationship building might come the most naturally, relationships between a youth leader and a young person are also the trickiest part of youth work to navigate. A youth leader needs to be careful that their relationship isn't misinterpreted as more than just a youth work relationship. Sometimes a young person might become dependent on their youth leader, or maybe see the youth leader in a romantic light, or misinterpret their actions to mean something that they don't. So having some good boundaries in place to ensure this doesn't happen is hugely important. A good youth ministry will enable youth leaders to walk a careful line of keeping boundaries, yet still creating a space where the young person can trust them and be honest. Sometimes these boundaries might come in the form of policies. A popular one I see all the time in youth groups is not having a youth leader do pickups or drop-offs with young people alone in a vehicle. They take another leader with them, or they drop off multiple young people at once. This is so that everything is kept above board or above reproach. And a leader and a young person are never alone together, where something might happen or someone might be accused of something happening. So by following this policy, nobody can accuse anyone of anything, because there's a witness present. I've even heard of youth groups installing a camera in their van so that there's accountability for anything that might go on behind closed doors, so to speak. When I first learned about policies like this, I was pretty disappointed. It made me really sad to think that there was yuck stuff that had happened in youth work and untrustworthy people had been taking advantage of vulnerable young people. And now there's these huge groups of very trustworthy people needing to take really inconvenient and over-the-top precautions to ensure that it never happens again. It took me a while to reconcile it all, but rest assured, even if the policies feel unnatural at first, soon they become second nature. And at the end of the day, if that's what it takes to keep the young person and the youth worker safe, then it's worth it. You might have heard of the term power dynamics before, or a power relationship. Something like a corporate CEO asking one of their employees to bring them a coffee. It's not their job to deliver coffee. They don't even usually interact with the CEO, but they deliver the coffee anyway because the CEO is in a position of power over them, and they're vulnerable to that power. In youth ministry, it might not be quite as obvious as this, but it's still there. Even the friendliest and most approachable of youth workers still stands in a position of power above a young person. The young person will always be vulnerable to the influence of the youth worker. Being aware of this dynamic is the first step. You might think a young person is acting out of independence and making an informed choice, when really they're just doing what their youth leader has asked of them. It's important to be really clear with young people that they have options and they're in control of their own choices, and of course never to use your influence for personal gain. Another great strategy to protect this relationship is making sure that you as their youth leader aren't the only person involved in their life, which brings me to connectedness and working collaboratively. Although the youth leader and young person relationship is really important, the youth worker should never be the be-all and end-all for the young person. It's important to know your limitations as a youth worker and try not to solve everything on your own. Our role is to connect the young people into other people who can also help them, like working to strengthen their relationship with their parents, helping them reconcile things with their friends, referring them to see a counsellor, or linking them in with some support at school, or sometimes all of the above. The beauty of being a youth worker is that you're a youth worker. That means you're not a counsellor or a teacher or a social worker or a parent or a friend or a relative. You're a youth worker. That means you're not a counsellor or a teacher or a social worker or a parent or a friend or a relative. You're a youth worker. We get to be the friendly face who walks between the other spaces. We debrief appointments, we hear the rants, and we gently encourage from by their side. I did a stint in youth mental health, working with young people who were transitioning in and out of hospital or home. This was a baptism by fire for me to learn about the system. My role was to be a youth worker, the person by their side, while a lot of other professionals flicked them between appointments and wrote case notes and diagnosed them with things that they had never even heard of. I learned heaps about connectedness here. These young people were involved in so many services, it was hard to keep track. And often in the system, the services don't communicate that well with each other either. So my role as a youth worker was to do my best to ensure that everyone was on the same page. The social worker, the nurse, the case manager, the psychologist, their family, our organisation, but also, mostly, to support the young person as they were going to and from appointments and trying to stay well amidst the chaos. In a setting like that, connectedness and quality relationships go hand in hand. I also used to work for an organisation that travelled all over Aotearoa speaking in schools about various wellbeing topics. We'd present on everything from making friends, technology, bullying, sex and relationships, drugs and alcohol, and mental health and wellbeing. In essence, it was health promotion, or as I like to call it, motivational comedy or youth work from a stage, because that sounds more fun. A typical day looked like visiting a school for the day, presenting to every student in big assemblies, chatting with some young people at morning tea and lunch, and then we would leave. We usually wouldn't go back to that school again for another 6 months to a year. As it turns out, this isn't entirely safe. Opening a can of worms about some pretty big topics, and then leaving young people to pick up the pieces on their own. A very clever organisation pointed this out to us. They're called Scope Aotearoa, and they review youth work organisations and make recommendations for improvement, and I highly recommend them. One of their recommendations for us was to work more collaboratively with other professionals in the schools that we visited. For us, that meant talking with local youth workers or youth organisations, the school counsellor, the deans of each year level, and any other community organisations who could help support. The change was actually really freeing. If a student came to talk to us after a presentation because the topic had maybe brought something up for them, because we'd met the counsellor earlier that day, we knew exactly who was the best person to connect them in with. We weren't just addressing important topics and sending young people to deal with them on their own. We were supporting young people to talk to people already in their community, to get help and follow up about those topics too. It was brilliant. And when we changed our approach to be more connected, we made so much more of a difference in the lives of those young people. So hopefully this paints a bit of a picture about quality relationships and connectedness. We need to have a relationship with a young person that's full of trust and that utilises the connections around the young person. This can make confidential issues a little bit tricky sometimes, but there is more on that in the next session.